Readers, listeners, welcome to the Foxed Page, where we dive deep into the very best books. You'll come away with a richer understanding of the text at hand, all while learning to read everything a little better. I'm Kimberly Ford, one-time adjunct professor at Berkeley, best-selling author and PhD in literature. Today, I am so excited. We are going to really dig in deep to Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I always like to begin these lectures with this question of why read this book, and maybe why read this book now? I can tell you that I was heavily motivated to reread this book because the movie is coming out. I'm recording this at the end of October 2025. I have not seen the movie yet, but love Paul Mescal, love Jessie Buckley. And if you're on YouTube, I'll throw up a couple of the stills that are circulating about the movie. They're so gorgeous. And of course, the movie's getting lots of Oscar buzz. And when an adaptation does come out, I always really like to go back and reread the book just so it's fresh in mind. I will say that the rereading of this book was just brutal. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. I was so emotionally wrecked by this book. Interestingly, I am not someone who cries while reading. Very, very few times have I ever been brought to tears by a book. That might be in part because of my antidepressants. But it's also just something about the cerebral act of reading and how it doesn't generally elicit tears. I finished this book on an airplane, and when my husband woke up, I think he just thought something catastrophic had happened because I was just undone. It's interesting to me that this book hit me so hard because this book came out, many of you will remember, in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. That's kind of an insane thing, in part because the subtitle of Hamnet, as you all know, is a novel of the plague. I literally had to just look at my title there, look at the cover, and make sure that I had that correct. I remember loving this book in 2020. It came out in the United States in July, came out in the UK at the end of March, I believe. My memories of the book were that it was absolutely gorgeous, that it was sad for sure because there was the death of a child, but also just it was this incredibly sumptuous and engaging. And I just had this very warm feeling about it. If you're a longtime listener to the Fox Page, you know that I do not have a great memory, which actually serves me so well in the process of rereading, because it's I have such a great feeling about a book, but I can't remember why. And so then it's just reading it all over again. What has happened now is I just think there is such a kind of dark tenor in the world these days. I think I probably was just ready to cry about something / anything. It was also a profound meditation, obviously, on grief. And I had the experience not that long ago of close family friends who lost a daughter in a terrible accident. She was 24 years old, an amazing, amazing, vibrant young woman. And that loss it was so difficult, obviously, for our entire community. And I think in part then I was reading with that kind of grief intact. I couldn't remember the ending of the book, obviously, because I never can. And I kept holding out hope especially in sort of the last 100 pages, which the first 200 pages are before young Hamnet dies and the last 100 are after he has died. I kept thinking, I really hope that Maggie O'Farrell is going to just lob out an incredibly cathartic ending, one that is going to sort of lift me out of this very sad reading experience. And that is absolutely what happened. The ending of this book, which we are going to discuss, I will let you know before the spoilers, if you have not already read the book. Although, it's not really that much of a spoiler. She really just tells you right on the first page that this young boy is going to die. It's not even the first page. It's in the frontispiece. It's in a note before you begin the novel. But this book has one of those endings that sort of shifted the whole thing for me in this miraculous way that art can do, where it is absolutely cathartic in the real sense of that word, of having really gone through something difficult, and then at the end of having the whole thing feel more hopeful. I think my brutal experience of the rereading of the book is, I think it's going to be really good in terms of watching the movie. I am not totally sure about that. I'm not one of those people that's always the book was so much better. It just is a different experience for me. I do have a quotation here from Vogue magazine, which says that the movie adaptation is painful, patient, and cathartic. Hamnet's finale will overwhelm you with faith in art as a salve for grief. So for those of you who like an agenda, what we're going to do today is dive in a little bit, and then we're going to essentially meditate for a while here on what an absolute feat this book is. And there are three elements of that we are going to focus on. The first one is the fact that the ending is known. That is a very hard thing to pull off, and it's very powerful here and leads to some very powerful moments. It's also historical fiction. I love historical fiction when it is good historical fiction. There are some real traps people can fall into, and Maggie O'Farrell is so good that she falls into absolutely like zero of them. We're going to pick apart a couple of passages where she does like a particularly good job of historical fiction. And the third aspect, why this is just such a feat, is that she is talking about Shakespeare. And I think a lot of people are drawn to that. A lot of people, that's kind of like a bonus. But for a lot of people, they're like, I don't know. I'm not really into the idea of Shakespeare. A lot of people are intimidated. Hamnet is close enough to Hamlet that I think people are like, oof, gosh, I don't know. Although if you're listening, obviously you are one of these readers who was not intimidated by the idea of a Shakespearean adaptation. But what I will argue as we are moving along here is that Shakespeare, and this is not like some major argument because I imagine many readers feel this way, but Shakespeare in this book is both everywhere and nowhere. I will also argue that this book, despite its title and despite the Shakespearean draw, is really a very feminist novel, and it is about Agnes. So very much about the woman who most of us know as Anne Hathaway. Not the Anne Hathaway. I have to say that when I was gathering all of the images, I was trying to find some images of Anne Hathaway, and you can imagine when you Google Anne Hathaway, it is the modern day Anne who pops up, which I just honestly was not ready for. So then I put in Anne Hathaway Shakespeare because I didn't want to just put in like Shakespeare's wife because that felt like, honestly, like kind of dismissive and reductive. So I put in Anne Hathaway Shakespeare, which also just kind of amused me. And up popped this thing about how there's like a lot of chatter, or there was a lot of chatter about the fact that Anne Hathaway's husband looks exactly like Shakespeare. And if you're on the YouTube, I'll put some pictures up. I mean, it is actually uncanny. There's even an article that was like, she comments on his likeness or the possibility of him being a reincarnation of William Shakespeare. And she says something delightful, which is just like, I don't think he is, but wouldn't that be cool? Or some sort of thing like that. So I should have been ready for Anne Hathaway. I'm not sure that I ever would have been ready for the fact that her husband is a Shakespeare lookalike. But what I love about the book is the presence of Anne. I'm going to call her Agnes as we move through because that is how she is addressed in the book. That is how she is known in the book. There's a little note at the end where O'Farrell says that her father named her that. And I like the fact that kind of slight difference is creating an expectation in the reader that this is not just like another book about Anne Hathaway. This is a book that delves a little deeper into, I mean, it's not like the real Anne Hathaway because there's no way Maggie O'Farrell knows, but it's a much more granular and much more detailed look at what she might have been. I found that person, that character, so inspirational and so incredibly well drawn. So we're going to look at this kind of masterful feat. We'll take a quick look at why I consider this a feminist novel. We're going to look kind of briefly, but I think in a very moving and profound way, at figurative language. This book is an absolute masterclass in how to use figurative language. Figurative language simply being things like metaphor and simile and foreshadowing, all that stuff you learned in sophomore English. Also, that's just a general excuse to look carefully at the prose, which is just so gorgeous throughout this entire novel. We're then going to look at the close, and again, I'll warn you before we do that. It is such a satisfying ending to a book. Okay, we're going to go ahead and dive into this book. If you are listening to the Fox page to be a better reader, and you all know that I don't love the idea of having to like improve your reading skills, although I get the idea of wanting to have a richer experience. If you are trying to be a more skilled reader, you should just slow down and pay attention, especially, or not especially, but in part to the title. So this title is one I like. The cover art of the hardback, it just didn't sit, like it didn't attract me. It wasn't something that like drew me in. I actually far prefer the cover of the paperback edition. I find it just beautiful and very like Elizabethan. The title is also very interesting to me. So In the beginning, she has that little note about the fact that Hamlet and Hamnet at that time, at the end of the 16th century, are interchangeable. It's very important that she does not call this book Hamlet. Part of that is because you would just have like this immediate evocation of the play. It would also just be so bold and weird to like write a novel called Hamlet. Actually, I am certain that there is a novel out there called Hamlet. But by that one little shift in that consonant, we are alerted to the fact that this is something that's going to be very different. This is something that's going to come at the story of Hamnet and of Shakespeare's family in kind of an oblique way, from a different angle. It's also very important that we do have a subtitle here, and that subtitle is really tipping her hand. It is A Novel of the Plague. And you don't have to actually assume anything at all, because when you open the page, meaning you don't have to start drawing conclusions about how the plague is going to affect someone named Hamnet, because we have a historical note at the beginning of the novel, and it reads this. In the late 1580s, a couple living on Henley Street, Stratford, had 3 children, Susanna, then Hamnet and Judith, who were twins. So I just want to note really quickly, this idea here of calling them a couple, it is not like William Shakespeare and his wife. Right from the very beginning, we have him as kind of every man. Again, and this is actually a fascinating thing. He is never mentioned. The word Shakespeare is never mentioned throughout the entire book. Neither is William or Will, which is kind of our first indication that this book is not about Shakespeare. It is very much about a man who is a father. He is referred to as an older brother, a father, the Latin tutor, the tutor, her husband. He's referred to in all of these ways, these different personae that he takes on. But he's never really like seen. I mean, he's definitely seen as William Shakespeare, especially like the very beginnings of his career. But the way that this is positioned as kind of regular people, you know, it's a couple living on Henley Street. They're just like all the rest of us. It's very powerful in kind of a subconscious way because it allows us to relate so much better. So then there's like a little cute like curly Q thing. And underneath it, we have the boy Hamnet died in 1596, aged 11. I have like ugh written next to that because there is something that is so 11. I mean, it just there's something so tragic and so dark about that for me. Then we have another little curly Q. 4 years or so later, the father wrote a play called Hamlet. I like this inclusion of or so because that is also alerting us to the fact that this is a book of historical fiction, but this is not a book that's trying to be precise. This is not a book that is going to offer you like a play-by-play of the story of Hamlet. One thing that was interesting, I had one reader say that she wanted to give the book to her husband, but she was tempted to tear out this first page because she herself, throughout the book, kept wishing that she did not know, in fact, that the young boy was going to die. I'm about to argue that there's some, I mean, sure, like I think there are a handful, actually, maybe a lot of people would like to have had the experience of not knowing what was going to happen. I myself always love it when I know what happens, because then I can focus on how it happened instead of what happened. The other thing that happens here, and we're going to dive right into this, is that because we know what is going to happen, we as readers have information that the other characters do not. This allows something called dramatic irony. It obviously comes from the idea of drama. It comes from like Greek, drama back in the day, and certainly from Shakespeare. It's largely the way that plays work because, players will come onto the stage, actors, and they'll do something and then they'll leave and other people come on and you as a reader have, you're privy to all of these different scenes. And when it works well in fiction, it is so amazing. So in my paperback version of the novel, we're going to be looking at pages 36 and 37. We're also then going to take a quick peek at 38 because this is so gut-wrenching that we are going to need some relief, which actually she offers right up on the very next page, which is the beginning of a new chapter. So on page 36, this is when Susanna is walking with her grandmother. Susanna was such a great character. She has all of these like things that, like she shrugs at one point and she's kind of rolling her eyes. Like she's just such a good teenager character, which makes the whole family so relatable. And also kind of adds to the tragedy because, Hamnet is never going to be like a surly teenager. And this family, has no idea what is hurtling toward it. So this little passage is, it's also telling us the content of Shakespeare's letters of what he needs their mother to do, whom she must speak to in the town about a tract of land he would like to purchase, a house he has heard for sale, a field they should buy and then lease, of how he misses them, how he sends them his love, how he wishes he could kiss their faces one by one, how he cannot wait until he is home again. So, first of all, if you're a reader and you know that that his only son is going to die, this is a very painful thing to read because he can't wait to come home and kiss their faces. That is not going to go well. It also brings up one of the many questions. I mean, just because we know that the boy dies, we don't know all the rest. We don't know how it happens. And one of the questions that arises is whether or not his father is going to make it home to say goodbye to him. So right at the beginning, we have this kind of tension. And what is so good about O'Farrell is she doesn't just tell us that. She's showing us in this very poignant way what it is he wants. And so you as a reader are worried about that because you have a suspicion that he is not going to get what he wants. And then we move on. And again, this is the thoughts of the oldest daughter. If the plague comes to London, he can be back with them for months. The playhouses are all shut by order of the Queen, and no one is allowed to gather in public. It is wrong to wish for the plague, her mother has said, but Susanna has done this a few times under her breath at night after she has said her prayers. She always crosses herself afterwards. But still she wishes it, her father home for months with them. She sometimes wonders if her mother secretly wishes it too. Oh my God, and here I have ugh in all capitals here. Because this is kind of just this throwaway thing about how Susanna is thinking about the plague and how it would bring her father home. But this idea, I mean, you have a sense after her brother dies, she's going to feel absolutely wrecked about the fact that she was wishing, she was like praying for the plague to come and obviously having no idea how it's going to ravage her family. So then a little further down, this is actually, again, harrowing. So she and her grandmother are arriving home. And we as readers know that right upstairs we have Hamnet and Judith, who are both very sick. So it reads this. Mary casts her eyes about the room. Where are the twins? She demands. Susanna raises one shoulder, lets it drop. There's that shrug. It's so good. I mean, it's speaking volumes with just, the movement of the shoulder. Haven't you seen them? Mary says, mopping her brow with a handkerchief. No. I told them, Mary mutters, bending to pick up Susanna's fallen cap, placing it on the table, to chop the kindling and to light the fire in the cookhouse. And have they done it? No, they have not. They are both in for a hiding when they come in. Which, again, brutal. I mean, this is, not going to happen. And then we have the end of the paragraph on page 37. Mary takes Susanna's arm and hauls her to her feet. They go out of the back door, which slams shut behind them. Upstairs, Hamnet wakes with a start. I mean, that is just an absolute crusher of a chapter ending. This is a book that has a lot to do with chance and with fate, and frankly, not with God, not with some sort of providence. We don't have a lot of sense that the world is orderly. We have the sense that very bad things happen to good people, that things are sort of chaos. And in the beginning, we have quite a bit. We have actually a lot of people just barely missing each other. We're actually going to take a look at that when we look at figurative language. But here, the dramatic irony here, the rough thing for the reader is we know that these people are upstairs and then the grandmother's just being kind of a bitch about it. And you're really wanting, first of all, Hamnet to have someone come home to him so he's not alone, but also someone to find out what's happening and to maybe try to do something for them. So it's terrible because then, of course, Hamnet wakes up and as the reader, he is once again alone. And how awful that will be for him. I mentioned that we're going to have a little bit of relief. So we have this idea, the chapter on 37 ends, Hamnet wakes with a start. And then we turn the page to 38, and it says, there is suddenly nothing so excellent as teaching Latin. So obviously this is, we have Shakespeare who's newly falling in love with Anne. One of the ways that this dramatic irony is so powerful is the structure of the novel. So we have this horrible afternoon and evening and night that is transpiring for the family. It begins with Hamnet looking for his mother, which is absolutely gut-wrenching. And we move through that afternoon and evening. And happily, it isn't half of the text. It's like those chapters feel relatively short. Actually, the first chapter is long, and it's just really very heavy because it's Hamnet looking for his mother and worrying about Judith, and it just feels very dark. But then we pepper in all of these chapters that show us so much about Agnes and about her mother, in fact, and her brother Bartholomew, and how she meets the Latin tutor. And we hear about Shakespeare's youth and his life with his family. So there's this incredible relief because we know what's going to happen in the front story being the afternoon with Hamnet. And it's such a delight to go back to these times where there's a little bit of humor, there's certainly lightness, and it's all about productivity and about things beginning, the beginning of the family, the birth of these children. All of that is hopeful in a way that we know the front story is not. I think that whole time I was saying 36 and 37 and 38, it was 56, 7, and 8. So now we're going to move on and talk about historical fiction. So some of the pitfalls, oh my God, bad historical fiction is so bad. We have amazing people. Lots and lots of people do this very well. But O'Farrell, one of the reasons I was so impressed with her historical fiction is this is not her normal thing. Like Hilary Mantel, like that, that's like her jam. We got a lot of very long, really incredible books by Hilary Mantel. I always wondered if it was Mantel or Mantel. And then I found a collection that she had published in the UK. And it was called Mantelpieces, which is actually very clever. And it really straightened out that mystery for me. But some of the pitfalls of historical fiction are that you can get these things like situations or scenes or, in fact, whole entire plot points that feel very contrived. Partially it's because you feel like this person who is writing the book has done a lot of research and they kind of want to show you all of these things that they have researched. Or they need a certain plot point to be incorporated, but it feels contrived. It's not growing organically out of the story. All sorts of problems with this kind of contrivance. We then, the next problem is all this kind of gratuitous detail. So part of what the novel is supposed to do, if it's a historical novel, is to transport the reader. And one of the ways to do that best is to give the reader a lot of detail. One book that doesn't do that was such an amazing piece of historical fiction, is You Dreamed of Empires by Enrique Alvarez. If you have not read that book, it is absolutely amazing. But it is very efficient to provide your reader a lot of details to have them feel like they are kind of in the scene. But you can end up with a lot of gratuitous details that just kind of feel like someone's trying to paint a scene and they're not doing any other work. If a reader too, but if a writer is worth her salt, every detail that she gives, every line of dialogue, every word on the page should be doing lots of things. It shouldn't just be painting the picture. It should be developing character, moving the plot forward. It has to be working hard. And in O'Farrell, that is absolutely the case. The other thing that can happen with historical fiction is just the idea of a very obvious plot. Here she is eradicating that worry by just telling us up front what is going to happen. But in a lot of cases, the plot is already known. If it's about Abraham Lincoln and he's going to die, you have to make that new somehow. Speaking of great historical fiction, that novel Booth that came out, it was kind of a while ago. I really loved that. That was some excellent historical fiction. It is about, in large part, Abraham Lincoln. But again, kind of like this is coming at it from a slightly different angle. The other problem that we can have is scope. So sometimes it's too narrow. You focus on just one part of a historical moment or historical event, and it feels unsatisfying because you're only getting one small chunk of it. Or you can have the scope just be way too wide, and we're trying to, I myself love a very long book, but it's a challenge sometimes to dig into, 700 pages of English royalty. And part of that is because the scope of time and geography, if you're Hilary Mantel, that is no problem. And in fact, it's absolutely delightful. But it can be a problem, this idea of scope. And she has done such an amazing job, again, because of the structure. We have this one afternoon that's providing an enormous amount of tension, but we also have a very free-ranging and, in fact, very wide-ranging bunch of chapters throughout that are really, moving from the birth, really, of Agnes all the way through her middle age. And in fact, we have indications of what is going to come after, which is so generous and amazing of O'Farrell. I was so happy that the ending, it's not even like clues that she provides about what is going to happen. She actually tells us, and I'm not going to say what it is right now in case you don't want a spoiler. At the end, we will talk about it. But she says things that are very reassuring about what is going to happen that for me were crucial. So we're going to take a look. This is also just an excellent excuse to really dig into some of this gorgeous prose. We're going to take a look at page 19 as an example of like really good historical fiction that is not only describing things, but it is telling us about the characters. It's giving us information about the plot. It's working on a bunch of different levels. So again, it's page 19. It's after a little space break, and it opens with the idea that is running actually through Hamnet's head, then moves to describe the grandmother and Susanna again. Susanna's getting a lot of attention today. Okay, on page 19. Unbeknownst to him, he passed the maid, both his grandparents, and his older sister on his trip to the physician's house, which again speaks to this idea of fate and how narrowly some people, avoid certain things and how other people have things befall them. So Hamlet is rushing to go find his mother, and then we have this. His grandmother, Mary, had been coming along an alleyway down near the river making deliveries, her stick held out to ward off the advances of a particularly peevish cockerel. So honestly, one of the ways that she's doing this that's a detail, but the words are also so evocative. The idea of peevish it really tells us so much about the moment, also about the grandmother. The grandmother is absolutely a match for this peevish bird. Also, cockerel, like, I don't know if, I don't think it's the same as like a hen and a cock. Like, I don't think it's just like a male, like it's not like a rooster. I think it's like a totally different kind of bird. I don't even know what it is exactly, but for me, it is so evocative because it's not just like a rooster. It's a word that feels very much like that era. So she's warding off the advances of a particularly peevish cockerel, Susanna behind her. Susanna had been brought along to carry Mary's basket of gloves. Deerskin, kidskin, squirrel-lined, wool-lined, embroidered, plain. I don't for the life of me know why, Mary had been saying as Hamnet flashed unseen past the end of the alley. You cannot at the very least look people in the eye when they greet you. These are some of your grandfather's highest-paying customers, and a shred of courtesy wouldn't go amiss. Now, I really believe that Susanna had trailed in her wake, rolling her eyes, lugging the basket filled with gloves. Like severed hands, she was thinking, as she let her grandmother's voice be blotted out by the sound of her own sigh, by the sight of a slice of sky cutting through the building tops. I mean, this is just such a gorgeous piece of writing. We could like really, really dig into this, but I just want to point out a few things. All of the description of the gloves, again, I'm not sure of the difference between like deerskin and kidskin. I mean, I guess it's like deer and a goat, a baby goat, which, I mean, yikes. But squirrel-lined, like this is really, again, evoking a moment in time. We also have the development of the tension between Mary and the rest of her family. Mary just being kind of cantankerous and kind of old and kind of bitchy, frankly. We also have an indication here of the grandfather's business as not maybe going quite as well as it could be. And that is a plot point that is important. It is one of the reasons why Shakespeare goes to London. And all of this is being developed on kind of like a very subconscious level because really it's just the two of them walking along. We also have this absolutely gorgeous string of words at the end here. She let her grandmother's voice be blotted out by the sound of her own sigh, by the sight of a slice of sky cutting through the building tops. So there are so many sighs. I started actually tallying them in the back of the book. One of the types of figurative language that she does that is so excellent is something called either a motif or a leitmotif. Sighs in this book feel like that to me. You have kind of this pattern of everyone sighing. And sigh is one of those amazing words where it kind of sounds like what it is. It's very evocative. And obviously the idea of everyone sighing is just, there's a lot of kind of sorrow in that. But then we have the sight of a slice of sky. It's just so beautiful. The sigh, sight of a slice of sky. You have this repetition that is just very pleasing to the ear in some ways, but it's also speaking maybe to the repetition of like windows or buildings and the idea that for Susanna, this stuff is like happening kind of, over and over and over. She has to be doing all of these things and all these chores. but it's also kind of a relief because we have the idea of all those sibilants, all those S sounds. It's so beautiful. I want to look at one other passage that really shows us how incredible O'Farrell's historical fiction is. So this is on page 75. Totally not. It is on page 72. The little numbers, even these readers are very strong. And even with them on, the numbers are like very fancy in a way that actually makes them kind of hard to read. And here it's not Mary. It's not the paternal grandmother. In this case, it is Joan, who is the maternal grandmother. Both of these women are, she's actually not the grandmother. She's kind of like a step grandmother. But both of these women are absolutely formidable. It is a book that's very kind of matriarchal. Agnes's mother died when she was very young. But what we do know about her like really shows her power. So here we have Joan. This is on page 72. This is just after Agnes has met the Latin tutor. So we have this. On a morning in late October, Joan is sifting through the mounds of laundry in the wash house, a pile of shifts and cuffs and caps ready for a dousing in scalding water and salt, a pile of stockings for a cooler tub, breeches caked with filth and mud, a spattered kirtle, a cloak that had borne the brunt of a puddle. I mean, what an incredible sentence, to have borne the brunt of a puddle. I mean, you can almost like just feel like all that wetness. But this is also an incredible way for her to describe what people are wearing. I don't know what a kirtle is, but that does make it feel like long ago. It's a very, it's actually a good reminder that as a reader, you don't have to know what the thing is. And in fact, some of the like task of kind of envisioning something is just to have it feel far away and have there be some sort of mystery. But we also have caps and cuffs, so we're given a sense of what these people are wearing. And then we have this. The pile Joan thinks of as the dirties is smaller than usual. Joan lifts a piece of the soiled cloth, one hand over her nose. A shirt smeared with some manner of dung is stuck to a cap. Joan frowns, looks about her. She stands for a moment, considering. So this is such an incredible, not only do we have what they're wearing, but honestly, I have never loved my washing machine more. What she's showing us here is the process of how gnarly it was as a woman to be running a household in this era at the end of the 16th century. But as she is doing that, which is important, setting the scene, giving us a bunch of detail, it's also a plot point because the dirties are all of the menstrual rags. All of these young women, her daughters, are all menstruating at the same time. And so this is Joan beginning, because of laundry, to suspect that Agnes is pregnant, which is it's just such an amazing way to show us the dawning of that information. And it tells us a lot too about Joan, their relationship. It's just absolutely so good. Okay, now we're going to move on to this thing, this feat that she somehow pulls off, which is the way that Shakespeare is both everywhere in this book and nowhere. Again, his name is never mentioned, which you might not have even noticed, but subconsciously that is helping you see that the really important people in this book are not Shakespeare. It's all the other people. So pretty late in the book, on 150, we're kind of halfway through, we have this interesting passage. Sorry, this is 156. I don't know what number I just said, but this is 156. This is Agnes together with Shakespeare, although she doesn't say that. She says his name, no response. She says it again. He raises his chin and looks at her. His face is horrifying to her, gray, puffy, beard straggly and unkempt. How did he get like this? How did it happen? How can she not have noticed this change coming? What is it she has not seen or chosen not to see? So this is before he decides that he needs to go to London, obviously. But what's important here is this idea of she says his name. So that in some ways is underscoring the fact that no one is calling him William, and certainly Shakespeare is not mentioned. He is instead called things like the Latin tutor, the older brother, all of which makes him kind of diffuse in a way that's very interesting. But one of the ways that his presence is felt, it's so incredible to me, is that there are many, many times in the novel where O'Farrell is using iambic pentameter. I will say that I had, at one point, she talks about his scant beard, and that really, to me, evoked kind of the classic image of Shakespeare that we all kind of have in our minds. In fact, if you're on YouTube, I will put that up for you. I have to say, the whole time I was I was not picturing Shakespeare, not picturing that image that is on the board, that is on the screen right now. or perhaps in your head, or maybe you've just Googled it. I was not picturing like a bald dude that's like not super handsome. The guy I was picturing was really handsome. In fact, I'm very happy about Paul Mescal having been cast. And also Paul Mescal can really he can really get a scant beard going. But that's one of those insanely great things about reading. Like, I am picturing someone, it's not super clear, but I am picturing someone to me who fits perfectly, this kind of like tortured genius, survivor of child abuse, like totally romantic guy. Like, I have this like heroic kind of vision, and he's really hot in my mind, which is just very, and my version is totally different than your version, which is just the absolute like miracle of reading. But one of the things that is so insane to me is that throughout this novel, she uses actually quite a bit of iambic pentameter. So very famously, iambic pentameter is the way that we describe like the poetic, the way that Shakespeare writes, like how like the like rhythm and the sound of it. And iamb is like a little foot. It's like a little unit of sound. It's not always one word, but it's sort of two syllables, and the emphasis is on the second one. And when you shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Like it's sort of natural to read it like that, but it is so beautiful when it crops up in the work. So on page 6, so obviously page 6 is very early in the book. This is when Hamnet is panicking because Judith is so ill, and he's trying to find an adult to help him. For a moment, it crosses his mind to call his father's name, to shout for him. But his father is miles and hours and days away in London, where the boy has never been. So where we have this iambic pentameter is his father is miles and hours and days away. So one of the like ways that you are, as the reader, you are kind of clued into the fact that this is iambic pentameter is often it will be something that syntactically is a little unusual. So here we have miles and hours and days away. That's kind of, it's called actually polysyndeton, like using those ands. But she's doing this beautiful thing too, where it's like, both in terms of time and in terms of distance, his father is absent. So it's just so beautiful to me. And there are a bunch of times where this happens. And not only do we have that one that's like kind of obvious, then we have the next line, which is also iambic pentameter. I'm going to read them together because they're so gorgeous. But his father is miles and hours and days away in London, where the boy has never been. So in addition to using like actual iambic pentameter, there are a couple of times where his presence really feels so strong in the novel. One of those is on page, I literally have to bring this so close to my face. It's on page 241. The 2 looks exactly like a 1. It's crazy. This is actually on page 240. And this is when he is going to go back to London. This is after the death of Hamnet. And she's struggling, Agnes is struggling with this idea and with the actual physical act of him leaving. It's no matter, she pants, as they struggle there beside the guzzling swine. Oh my God, guzzling swine. It's such a good way to set the scene and remind us of where we are in time and place. So then she says, I know, you are caught by that place like a hooked fish. What place? You mean London? No, the place in your head. I saw it once, a long time ago. A whole country in there, a landscape. You have gone to that place, and it is now more real to you than anywhere else. Nothing can keep you from it, not even the death of your own child. So, honestly, the idea that there's a whole world inside of him, a whole landscape, is such an incredible way to just like sum him up. It's so beautifully done. And again, this is a moment where we're learning about the strength of Agnes. We're learning about the reasons why he really wants to go. It's beautifully articulated. And there are a couple of other times where it was so amazing to me because this idea of having him sort of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. One of the things at the very beginning that is happening is his career is obviously not established. At the time when he meets Agnes, he's a Latin tutor, so he's definitely not writing, Macbeth. And there were a couple of times where like fate seemed like maybe he wasn't going to do the writing, like he was not going to be a writer. And I found them so like uncanny and like upsetting. So on page, oh my God, what page are we here? On page 59, honestly, it looks nothing like a 5. I don't know what is happening with these numbers. On 59. And this is between Shakespeare and his father, John. And you, John turns on his son. Get out of here. Find some useful occupation, if you can. John shakes his head, turning his attention back to the cutting of a squirrel's skin into useful, narrow strips. All that education, he mutters to himself, to the slippery lengths of pelt, and not an ounce of sense. I mean, honestly, I have in the margin here, such high stakes. What if? I mean, it's like, you're like, oh my God, like his father, no one was supporting him. It's very like, I mean, in this world that O'Farrell has created, and it had to have been a little bit like this. A lot of things had to go right for these plays to be written. And obviously there are lots of theories about like maybe it wasn't just one man and maybe it wasn't Shakespeare. But we're going to kind of, take that as an assumption that it was, in fact, William Shakespeare who wrote these plays. And the idea that, like, maybe he wouldn't have because of some terrible father is just, like, crazy. And then what's so interesting is on 59, we have that, where the father's like, go and get a real job. And then on 61, so just like 2 pages later, we have his sister, and she's looking at his papers up in the attic. So just 2 pages later. She looks at the curls of paper. She sees the words never and fire and something that might be fly or try. And I was so relieved. Like part of me was like, okay, whew, phew. O'Farrell is introducing the idea of him working, the idea of him like beginning to be who he became, this writer who is still so alive in our imaginations. And we have like actual evidence of it. I also did a little sleuthing because I was like, what was he working on? And I think you could argue that he's just starting out. He's not working on anything that was saved or published. And I have in my notes right here that this is from Hamlet. So what O'Farrell is doing is like tantalizing us a little bit. I mean, I am not, I'm going to be clear with you. Don't really love poetry and don't really love Shakespeare. I like Shakespeare as like a puzzle, like it's kind of interesting for my mind. I have gone to many, like not many, but when I go see Shakespeare, I tend to watch like one act and then I'm like, okay, got it. Although I did love the adaptation of Macbeth not that long ago with Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand. Is that her name? McDormand? Anyway, incredible movie. But what we have here is allusion to an actual chunk of Hamlet, which is this, which honestly, like slightly anachronistic because he wouldn't be working on this very early in his career. It would have been later. But she has seen the words never, fire, and something that might be fly or try. And the lines read this. Doubt thou the stars or fire, doubt that the sun doth move, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt I love. I mean, honestly, as I'm reading through, I'm realizing that we have never and we have fire, which honestly, that's enough for me. It would be very much like Maggie O'Farrell to include some, an allusion to an actual part of Hamlet, which we also see a little snippet of in the very end. So we're going to move on now from talking about the ways that Shakespeare is both kind of like in the novel, but also really not in the novel, to one of the points I really want to underscore, which is this idea that this is really a book about Agnes. This is really a very feminist novel about Anne Hathaway. Like that's kind of how most of us think of her. So what I want to read here is actually mostly about her mother, but it has everything to do with her. This is also, again, a very matriarchal book. And this is Shakespeare who is, imagining like the formidable nature of both the mother and daughter. So honestly, I have to look so close. On 32, page 32. He does not even for one moment entertain the idea that the woman he saw is in fact the eldest daughter of the house. She has a certain notoriety in these parts. It is said that she is strange, touched, peculiar, perhaps mad. He has heard that she wanders the backroads and forest at will, unaccompanied, collecting plants to make dubious potions. It is wise not to cross her, for people say she learnt her crafts from an old crone who used to make medicines and spin and could kill a baby with a single glance. It is said that the stepmother lives in terror of the girl putting hexes on her, especially now the yeoman is dead. Her father must have loved her, though, because he left her a sizable dowry in his will. Not that anyone, of course, would want to wed her. She is said to be too wild for any man. Her mother, God rest her soul, had been a gypsy or a sorceress or a forest sprite. The tutor has heard many of these fanciful tales about her. His own mother shakes her head and tuts when this girl comes up in conversation. So much of this feels so Shakespearean. The idea of her being a gypsy or a sorceress or a forest sprite, like those are all, we have the weird sisters at the beginning of Macbeth, and we have lots of forest sprites in Midsummer Night's Dream. Like the idea of these fanciful tales. I mean, there's so many like little pieces of Shakespeare that are here. But the main focus of this is this very crone energy. There's literally like actually a crone here. But the mother and the daughter are both very powerful. And then right across on 33, we have this amazing short paragraph. I am tutoring the boys here, he says, in Latin. He expects her to be impressed, to nod deferentially. A learned man is he, a man of letters, of education. No rustic stands before you, madam, he wishes he could say, no mere peasant. But the girl's expression is unchanged. Ah, she says, the Latin tutor, of course. It's so amazing. I mean, when you take one step back and you're like, this is William Shakespeare. Of course, he's not like William Shakespeare quite yet, the way we think about him now. But we see like his confidence and then essentially his future wife like besting that confidence. I will interject right now. Their relationship was so amazing to me. Obviously huge trials, but there was a way that they were committed to each other that I just found so moving. So we're just going to look at two more quick little parts that show us really the strength of Anya's. So on page 68, this is when they are in the Apple store together and they're having sex. It was her hands, however, that lifted her skirts, that pushed herself back onto the shelf, that drew the body of the Latin tutor towards her. You, the hands said to him, I choose you. I mean, we have, like, even in matters, and actually very importantly, I shouldn't say even, very importantly in matters of sex, she is the one who is really ultimately in control. She also, she's the one who has this plan to get pregnant because then they would actually be together despite the fact that they have some class differences. There is so much work going on here, but it's really like a good testament to her strength. And the book is honestly it's so good and it is so well written. And this matriarchal stuff is so tangible in so many ways that we have this thing happen on page 101 that normally would have felt so contrived. But in O'Farrell's hands, it's so organic and so beautiful. So earlier at some point, they don't mention the mother's name, but they say that it's the name of a tree. And then later on page 101, when they're actually getting married, Anya's and William with their families all around them, we have this. Something is dropping from a tree above them. It lands on Agnes's shoulder. I knew I was going to do that. Anya's. There's a very cute note, not cute, there's a very nice note in the back where O'Farrell says that her father lists her as Anya's. So everyone has, called her Anne Hathaway for so long. But O'Farrell wanted to honor that because the connection between the father and his eldest daughter does seem unusual. I also like the way that Anya's, it's because it's slightly different, we have that slight nuance. It makes us, first of all, it gives like a more interesting vision of Anne Hathaway, but it also shows us that we're looking at her in a slightly different light. Okay, so this is them at the wedding. I'm going to start over again just for this little chunk. Something is dropping from a tree above them. It lands on Anya's shoulder, on the yellow stuff of her gown, and then on her chest, to the gentle swell of her stomach. She catches it neatly, cupping it against her body. It is a spray of rowan berries, fire red, still with several narrow, silver-backed leaves attached. So rowan is the name of her mother, but these rowan berries falling, like it really should be too much that like her mother is kind of present at the wedding, but it's so beautifully done. And honestly, I think part of it is the detail of those leaves. Like, it's not readily apparent why the leaves would be important, but that kind of completion, that kind of thing makes it feel less contrived and more organic. It also is playing on the idea of these women as being very invested in the botanical side of life, really having like a lot of knowledge about like medicinal herbs. It's also important that they are fire red because you have this sense of these women as being very fiery. This truly is like the matriarchal thing. I mean, obviously Mary and Joan are problematic in their own ways, but still the people who we most see in charge are women in a way that I think is very inspirational. Before we move off the idea of this being a feminist novel, I want to look at one of our like foundational and most important feminist studies, which is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. So some of you will remember that kind of like somewhere in the middle of this talk that she gave at Newnham College, Virginia Woolf is, she imagines like an extraordinarily gifted sister of Shakespeare. And what she is writing in this case is a reaction to one of the bishops telling her that women could never write the plays of Shakespeare. So she has this. And honestly, when I went back to look at this, because the idea of Judith Shakespeare, the sister here, I mean, in Woolf's imagining of this scenario, Judith is his sister. In fact, Judith was his daughter. But it's uncanny the way that we have what Woolf is describing and what actually happened in Shakespeare's life. Okay, so on 46, women cannot write the plays of Shakespeare. I could not help thinking, as I looked at the works of Shakespeare on the shelf, that the bishop was right, at least in this. It would have been impossible, completely and entirely, for any woman to have written the plays of Shakespeare in the age of Shakespeare. Let me imagine, since facts are hard to come by, what would have happened had Shakespeare had a wonderfully gifted sister called Judith, let's say. Shakespeare himself went, very probably, his mother was an heiress, to the grammar school where he may have learnt Latin, Ovid, Virgil, and Horace, and the elements of grammar and logic. He was, it is well known, a wild boy who poached rabbits, perhaps shot a deer, and had, rather sooner than he should have done, to marry a woman in the neighborhood who bore him a child rather quicker than was right. I just found that uncanny, which is it's not actually that weird because Virginia Woolf and Maggie O'Farrell are probably working from similar source material, but I was just like, oh my gosh, here's Virginia Woolf underscoring all the same things that O'Farrell is. That escapade sent him to seek his fortune in London. He had, it seemed, a taste for the theater. He began by holding horses at the stage door. Very soon, he got to work in the theater, became a successful actor, and lived at the hub of the universe, meeting everybody, knowing everybody, practicing his art on the boards, exercising his wits in the streets, and even getting access to the palace of the Queen. Meanwhile, his extraordinarily gifted sister, let us suppose, remained at home. And then she goes on, it's so beautiful because the sister is equally adventuresome, but Woolf is underscoring some very practical things. Like, she can't hold horses by the stable door because, she makes allusion to, sexual assault. It's simply not safe for a woman to just head off to London at the end of the 16th century. So I loved the content of this, but mostly I just loved, all of those parallels, which, again, shouldn't be that shocking, but Virginia Woolf being one of my very favorite writers, it just was an absolute delight to hear those echoes. Okay, we're going to look at figurative language here. We're just looking at one paragraph. It is on page 10. It is just virtuoso. And then we're going to look at the close of the novel. So on page 10, this is obviously very early. And this is one of those times where going back and looking at the text again was just an absolute revelation to me. You'll find out why when you hear this. Hamnet scuffs his boots in the grit of the yard. He can see the remains of a game he and Judith had been playing not long ago. The lengths of twine tied to pine cones to be pulled and swung for the kitchen cat's kittens. Small creatures they are with faces like pansies and soft pads. We're actually going to stop as we move through here, I think. Kitchen cat's kittens, that is so good. It's so kind of playful. It sounds almost like a rhyme or like a tongue twister. But it is so evocative, too. We also have in the beginning, he's scuffing his boot on the grit, scuff and grit. Those are words that are onomatopoeic. They sound like what they are, which is another type of figurative language that's very powerful. So after we have the kitchen cat's kittens, we have small creatures they are, with faces like pansies and soft pads on their paws. So good. Faces like pansies is incredible. That's a simile. It's just so, so beautiful. And I can kind of picture it. I think I can picture a pansy, but it doesn't even matter because we have pansy and pads and paws. So you have this kind of soft sound that almost, it's kind of playful, it's light, it's positive, but it also sounds kind of like padding. You have just such an incredible evocation there. You can also just literally feel the little paws, the little pads, how you can put your fingers in the little toes of kittens. Oh my God. I find this so evocative. Then we have this, which is really incredible. The cat went into a barrel in the storeroom to have them and hid there for weeks. Hamnet's grandmother looked everywhere for the litter, intending to drown them all, as is her custom, but the cat thwarted her, keeping her babies secret, safe, and now they are half grown. 2 of them running about the place, climbing up sacks, chasing feathers and wool scraps and stray leaves. Judith cannot be parted from them for long. This is incredible. So what we have here is like a parallelism and also kind of a foreshadowing, because when Anya is getting ready to have her babies, she cannot be with Mary, and she goes off into the forest to have Susanna, just exactly like this cat is kind of moving away to have her babies. And that takes on importance because the second time when she's having the twins, there's that incredibly detailed and moving and kind of harrowing scene where Mary's like trying to get her to sit on the birthing stool. And I mean, just you have some really indelible images of what is happening when she's having these children. And O'Farrell is so good that we also have like kind of like a foreshadowing here of what is going to happen later. You have also a pair of the kittens who are kind of grown and safe, which is ironic because they are kind of symbolic of Judith and Hamnet, who are also a pair and who are not, in fact, all that safe. And then the last part, that Judith can't be parted from them for long. If you recall, at the very end of the novel, one of the things that happens is Judith, like, she has a bunch of cats and they're very important to her. So we basically have the continuation of this game that she was playing on the afternoon that she got the bubonic plague and the night that her brother ended up dying, her twin brother. We have, in the very beginning of the book here, we have this idea that she had been playing games with cats that day, and that essentially that she continued doing that, maybe, you know, in part, maybe in homage, but also just as like wanting to hold on to childhood. It is such a beautiful thing, and it really points to the way that this novel is incredibly structured. Like, we have, I mean, obviously we don't know how many kittens Shakespeare had when he was little. These are facts that she is pulling out for us. I had an MFA teacher who gave us the best advice, which is if you really want a scene to sing, he definitely wouldn't have said that. That's kind of a stupid way to say it. But if you really want something to be vivid, you need to provide the reader a detail that they themselves wouldn't come up with. So, you know, if I tell you to, imagine an Elizabethan courtyard, you would probably you'd have like the half timbered, those Tudor houses, and you would have the kids in like their little Elizabethan clothing. You wouldn't necessarily have these kittens and a barrel and a cat who has a litter. Those are all of the things that she is supplying that are not only helping the reader see the whole thing more vividly, but she's also doing all of this foreshadowing and speaking of the innocence and of childhood. I mean, she is just so good. So now we're going to read the very last page of the book. If you're someone who has been listening to this and you haven't finished the book, then I'll say to you right now, thank you for tuning in. Happy reading. For the rest of you, we're going to just read this paragraph. So I think you'll recall that Agnes is there and she's furious because he has written this play, and it's the name of it's very close to the name of their son, and she feels so betrayed that he would use their family's tragedy and not even tell her about it. So she's really angry. She gets there. And then as the play, when it begins, and she sees the ghost of the father and the fact that the son lives, and O'Farrell does an amazing job of showing us how much this little boy looks like Hamlet, which in my mind, Hamlet was a little bit older. I imagine Hamlet being like 20. So I was having to make like a little adjustment there in my mind. But she herself is marveling at the fact that he has done this beautiful thing. He, with this work of art, has taken on the death and taken it from their son, who is going to live on in this piece of art. It's uncanny for her. It's moving. And actually, for those of you on YouTube, I'm going to put up a still photo of Jessie Buckley. This is one of the few images that are like out on the internet that are from the movie Hamnet. And I found this image so moving. So enjoy that image, all of you on YouTube. And one of the important things here, this is one of the opening scenes, and the ghost does say the last line of the book, which is just masterful. Not only is the line itself like incredible, but it's incredible that it is the father's name. It is William Shakespeare, like literally. I'm having to do that math, like 400 years ago, like saying like this line, which I'm not going to say until we get there. But obviously it's also has everything to do with the son and the idea of mortality and the idea of the importance of remembering people whom we love. So it's also significant to me that this is kind of that toward the end of the scene with the ghost and Hamlet. But Hamlet has the last line of the play, and that line is "the rest is silence," which is just so beautiful, and it's resonant in this incredible way. And I just was so moved by this scene and the way that it has this interplay, obviously, with Hamlet itself. Okay, so oh my God, what page is this? On 305, this is the last page of the book. She will say all of this to her husband later, after the play has ended, after the final silence has fallen. So there we have reference to this last line, "the rest is silence." After the dead have sprung up to take their places in the line of players at the edge of the stage, after her husband and the boy, their hands joined, bow and bow, facing into the storm of applause. After the stage is left deserted, no longer a battlement, no longer a graveyard, no longer a castle. After he has come to find her, forcing his way through the crowds, his face still streaked with traces of paste. After he has taken her by the hand and held her against the buckles and leather of his armor, after they have stood together in the open circle of the playhouse until it was as empty as the sky above it. So I mentioned earlier that I was so pleased that O'Farrell was so gracious here and told us what was going to happen. So, I mean, this is as happy an ending as you could possibly imagine. And I was so moved. I said it before and I'll say it again. This was an ending that kind of shifted the whole thing. It ended up being about a marriage. It ended up being about a woman, mortality, forgiveness. It was so kind of monumental. And that is largely because O'Farrell very gracefully was able to preserve this incredibly important and taut and poignant moment, but she also was telling us what's going to happen. You know, she's going to kind of describe the happy ending, which is about to follow this very tense moment. So here are the final paragraphs. For now, she is right at the front of the crowd, at the edge of the stage. She is gripping its wooden lip in both hands. An arm's length away, perhaps two, is Hamlet, her Hamlet, as he might have been had he lived, and the ghost, who has her husband's hands, her husband's beard, who speaks in her husband's voice. She stretches out a hand as if to acknowledge them, as if to feel the air between the three of them, as if wishing to pierce the boundary between audience and players, between real life and play. The ghost turns his head towards her as he prepares to exit the scene. He is looking straight at her, meeting her gaze as he speaks his final words. Remember me. Oh my God. Wow, people. That was unexpected. Whew. I am just going to leave it there because apparently I'm going to have a good cry. This is the power of literature. It was just it's so incredible. And to read it aloud is so moving. And I'm going to just end by thanking you all for giving me the opportunity to dig in so deeply to literature that matters and literature that is so deeply affecting. So thank you. I'm feeling better now. Okay. Thank you for tuning in. Happy reading.